Hello everyone, this is part 2 of my series of videos on how I moved my fish room from one part of the country to the other part. Now if you haven't seen part 1, go check that out first because it talks about how I planned all of this out and it talks about the overall situation. Now in this video, I'm going to cover everything up until moving day. So this will be how I packed the fish, how I packed the plants, how I packed the tanks, how I prepped the fish, prepped the plants, prepped the tanks. There's a lot of preparation in this video. Now, it will be pretty chaotic and disjointed, similar to the last video if you remember, and I will interject periodically to fill in the gaps on how this all worked together, because again, similar to the last one, the moving was just chaotic and there's holes, and so I'll try to piece it all together as much as I can. But again, this will just cover everything up until moving day. So sit back, enjoy the video, and I'll see you guys at the end.
Okay, so, lots happened actually since I've really gotten a chance to film anything. Good news, bad news regarding the move anyway. So it's pretty late right now. The move was supposed to happen in tomorrow. But due to renovations, the place I'm moving into won't be ready for another 2 weeks. Now, I found this out earlier in the week, and I really didn't mean to record, but, you know, things happen, things get busy, and so I don't want to film this just to give that update, because it's like, you know, in terms of like my thought process going forward, it's like, well, I have a lot more time to really finalize and come up with good plans, and nothing will focus. Isn't that nice? And the reason in particular I'm filming right now is because with great timing with all this comes some kind of outbreak with the betas. I'm going to cut out all of the footage of the betas for now because there was a lot of footage, a lot of things were happening with them, and I want to take that and make it into dedicated videos where I can talk about the genetics, the health, and all these different factors that were going on right now, because it truly turned out to be a lot more than I originally thought. Alright, we got 4 days until the move. Here we go. Alright, so we gotta start taking stuff down. We are running out of time. I really don't like taking fish out of their nice filtered waters and their established tanks, but man, there's just too much. I gotta start taking stuff down so I don't run out of time. So the plan, we're gonna take down this system. So this is my brine shrimp hatchery right there, 10 gallon, 40 breeder. This tank's empty. This just needs to get cleaned out. The angel pair are going to go in buckets. So the reason I'm taking this down first is because all these things are run off one air pump. So I'm going to use this air pump to supply air to the buckets. So most of my fish anyway are going into buckets, and each bucket is going to have one of my sponge filters. So you can see these 40 breeders have 2 sponge filters in each. And the plan is to put sponge filters in each bucket, so each bucket has a filter. It will receive air so that each bucket will be filtered, which should hopefully reduce the issue of ammonia being produced in transit. Now, I need to take down the tanks earlier, and so I'll be able to use these air pumps to filter the water, make sure the fish will be okay while they're in the buckets. They'll be in the buckets less than a week. So I guess it's like, I'm leaving Sunday, we're moving in on Monday. And today's Wednesday. Yeah, so that's kind of the time frame. The reason I'm starting with these tanks is that they're mostly empty. There's potted plants in these with some driftwood and stuff. So the potted plants are going to go in a container that it's going to be sealed, so it'll just be airtight. I'm just going to rely on moisture just to keep the plants alive. Otherwise, these tanks are just going to get completely cleaned out, and they'll just dry, and it doesn't matter. So the sponge filters will be okay. The bacteria will survive because they're going to be getting air. They're going to be filtering the water for the fish. The plants will go into containers so they won't die. So that's good. This tank with the soil and with the plants, kind of like my bedded tanks, which I think I showed last time, this is just going to get sealed. So I'm going to take clean fill, plastic wrap, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to seal the top because the lid doesn't quite seal it very well. You know, there's a little gap. And I don't want the plants to dry out and just kill, like, I don't know, like $30 worth of plants or something, you know. So I'm gonna do that. But yeah, so the fish will go in buckets, plant pots will go into containers, the sponge filters will go into the buckets so that the bacteria survive, and they also filter the water for the fish. Fish will go into buckets. I'm starting with these because these are a little bit less dense. So like my angel pair, they're just going to go into one bucket. My baby angels are going to go into one bucket. You know, it's like, it's less dense. You're going to less bio load than like these big angels. There's actually quite a few angels in there. Oh, you really can't see. I need to clean stuff, but I suppose that'll happen once I'm... So I'm going to move on from taking down the actual fish room to showing the process that I use to take down and store my plants and fish for my 75-gallon planted community aquarium. Now this tank is a little bit more of an average tank, where my fish room ones are, you know, bare bottom, you know, lots of pots. I mean, I guess I use pots in this tank, but it's a little bit more like a, you know, a regular aquarium. Now, with this tank, it proved to be a bit of a challenge because I had so much lava rock that I used to make this kind of wall effect in front of these pots. So these pots are full of aqua soil. They have a lot of my plants, and they're in these pots so that I use less aqua soil, and so my catfish, plecos, my other bigger fish won't make a big mess if they stir it up, because it's kind of, you know, all nice and contained, and it won't just get into my filter. And so that's kind of what I'm showing right here. The audio got a bit messed up, which is why I'm recording this after the fact. But my process is pretty simple. Go through, take the pots out. They go into these sealed containers, which I'll show here in a second. And then I'm going to take all the lava rock and sand out. So the rock is going to go into this foam container that I had from sometime when I went to the fish store. You can see it right there. So that whole thing was filled up with the lava rock. The black sand that's in the tank, I took that and I put that into a 5-gallon bucket. Now, ideally you want to remove the fish prior to removing the plants and the decorations, because it's going to stress the fish out. At this point, I'm pretty sure I went ahead and removed all of the angel fish. A lot of the fish I could catch really easily. You know, the catfish and, you know, some of my other cichlids, it's impossible. Now, these containers that I used to hold the plants worked out really, really well. The only downside is maintaining good temperature. I lost a few plants because I think they got too cold, but none of them dried out. Now, these containers are no standing water. I mean, there's, you know, like a centimeter or two at the bottom, but these containers have these locking lids with this foam kind of around the, you know, where the lid and the container meet, and it helps create this nice seal to help hold in moisture. And you can already see on that other container how much condensation was already built up on those. But the process is pretty straightforward. Remove the fish, remove the plants, kind of go in order, make sure every single thing is taken care of. Make sure the fish are out of your plants. I had that happen. One of my cichlids, one of those keyholes, got stuck in the plant pot and didn't swim out when I lowered the water level. So make sure you check your plants and your decorations for fish when you're taking this down. But otherwise, it should go just fine. Here they are, the moving containers. The fish are all packed away. They're ready to go to their new home. And oh man, this was a very satisfying time in the process. All of the planning, preparations, materials just resulted in just these beautiful moving buckets that all happened to match with their plants, their sponge filters. And what I want to do is show what this really looks like and talk about some of the things I noticed at this point in the process. Now, each of these buckets has their own sponge filter, like I've said multiple times, and they have some different plants and stuff that were mostly from my fish room tanks that were just floating around. Some of these are affixed to things like mats. There's a couple pieces of driftwood in there and a couple of these. But otherwise, nothing too big, nothing too heavy that could potentially harm the fish. The sponge filters, you know, even though they're quite large, they move pretty slowly in the water. The fish don't seem to have any problem getting out of the way. So while they're moving in transit, I was never really worried that, you know, they'd get hurt with the sponge filter. For some of my smaller fish, I think this was really helpful because it allows the fish to have places to hide that aren't, you know, heavy, you know, rocks or other pieces of decoration. Now, it was important to know at the time I ran into an issue when preparing the water. Now, wasn't using tank water. Rather, I was making fresh water straight from the tap, dechlorinated and everything else. Now, at the time, I was dealing with my tap water being really soft, which I hadn't really dealt with up to this point. And what I've been doing is using this old reef buffer. And this reef buffer, it buffers the water to like a really high pH, like an 8.2, 3, whatever, like a saltwater reef tank range. And, I've been doing very small doses of this in my aquariums to help kind of counterbalance the soft water to keep my pH stable. Now, the problem is with this small water volume in these buckets being, 3-4 gallons, because they're not, full all the way, the problem was the pH would shoot way up. And this happened in a couple of the buckets where one of my plecos was died after being in these buckets for 10 minutes. And I was I couldn't figure out what's wrong. I'm oh my gosh, something's wrong with these buckets. Something's up. I got to do something. But it turns out it was just that high pH. I mean, I water changed out the bucket. I tested it, noticed the high pH, and the other fish were fine. But man, it was a real shock, especially when I'm packing these up and it's we're ready to go, and then it's a fish dies. It just you don't want to deal with that. But hey, I learned from it, and we were able to get the fish there in the end just fine. Now, the fish that are in my nano planted aquariums, I didn't get a whole lot of footage of this, which I really regret, is they are in their tanks. So tanks that have a base layer of aqua soil, rather. Those tanks I sealed with a plastic wrap, just kind of around the top, hold in the moisture, leave a few inches of water, the fish will be just fine. I had done that for many years, taking fish tanks in and out of my dorm room back home during the summer months in college, and it had always done just fine. I think it's good to make sure that your fish can handle changes in temperature. If your fish are very sensitive, you may not want to go this route, but for me, it did work out in the end. Other than that, though, these buckets worked out quite well. The sponge filters were great at just allowing me to plug them in, filter the water whenever I can, especially when I got to my new destination, as I was able to just carry the buckets inside, plug in the pump on the first available outlet, and then I can go do everything else. The bettas, they remained in these small containers. I got these on Amazon, weren't too terribly expensive. The bettas did just fine. I added a few floating plants because I had tons. And then right here in this tank, you can see, the fish in the bottom. This is kind of what I was talking about, leaving just a little bit of water, just enough so that the fish have, they can get around. The tank's not too heavy that it'll crack or anything like that.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Make sure you check out part 3 of this series, where I'll talk about the moving day, unboxing the fish room, and what I would have done differently throughout this entire process. So again, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.